Before you step into this story, take a breath. Let the noise of your room fade and listen instead to the quiet that lives beneath it. Because what follows is not a story about dreams, it's a story about you. You've been here before. The same nights, the same faces, the same unease that greets you when you close your eyes. You may call them coincidences or nightmares or imagination, but Jung would tell you they are warnings whispered from the part of you that never sleeps. This is not an easy journey. It is a descent into the silent machinery of your own soul, a place where memory becomes architecture and emotion takes shape. Some who enter never return the same. So as you listen, don't try to analyze, feel. Let the words move through you, echoes in a tunnel you've walked in another life. And if, at some point, you sense that the dream I'm describing begins to sound familiar, don't be afraid. It only means the soul has started to remember it. Welcome to the Soul's Trap, a dream that repeats until you wake. It begins the same way every night, the same corridor, the same dim light flickering above. You walk, though you've walked it 1,000 times before. Something unseen follows, never running, never stopping, just watching. You wake before it reaches, breathless, heart rate. And then, the next night, it returns, the same dream, the same trap. Carl Jung believed that such dreams were not accidents, but warnings from the deepest layers of the echoes from the soul itself. He called them psychic loops, patterns formed when consciousness refuses to face something buried within. Repeated dreams, he said, are the psyche's last resort to make us see what waking life refuses to confront. But he also warned that these dreams, if ignored, could become prisons, spiritual snares woven by the unconscious, where the dreamer becomes both the hunter and the hunted. To Jung, the dream world was not fantasy. It was a living dimension of the mind, ancient and autonomous. Dreams are the secret speech of the soul, but they speak in a language we have forgotten. The recurring dream, then, is not just memory replayed, it is a message unanswered. Each repetition deepens the labyrinth, tightening its walls until the dreamer is caught inside a loop of unfinished meaning. Jung called this phenomenon the soul's trap. There was a patient whose dream haunted Jung for years. A man in his 40s, disciplined, successful, rational to the point of arrogance. For months he dreamt that he stood before a vast lake In the center floated a wooden coffin, half open. He would walk toward it, but before he reached the shore, the water turned to mirrors reflecting his face, endless, until he awoke screaming. Night after the same image, unchanged. Jung urged him to approach the coffin within the dream, but the man resisted. Why should I? It's just a dream. Weeks later, he collapsed during a lecture. A minor stroke followed by strange visions while unconscious. He described to Jung, once recovered, that he had seen the same lake, but this time he dared to look into the coffin. Inside was himself, smiling. Jung later wrote in his journal, "The soul will repeat its lesson until it is understood, but if ignored, it will find other ways to teach." To Jung, the repeating dream is not punishment, it is a summons. Each recurrence marks a place where the psyche is frozen, where emotion has turned to stone. It could be guilt, fear, desire, or memory, something unassimilated, demanding recognition. The repetition is not the dream's cruelty, it is the dream's persistent. It returns because we do not listen. Modern neuroscience has begun to confirm Jung's intuition. During REM sleep, the brain replays emotional memories, but when trauma or repression blocks them, the neural pathways loop recurring dreams. The mind circles its own wound, searching. The hippocampus consolidates memory, becomes a stage for unfinished stories. The amygdala, the center of fear, becomes the director. Science calls it memory reconsolidation. Jung called it haunting. Yet there is something deeper than biology at play. Jung believed that repeating dreams often occur when the soul resists transformation. The dream is the bridge between conscious life and the archetypal realm, the realm of symbols, gods, and forgotten truths. To ignore a repeating dream is to reject the call to growth, and what resists growth. He saw these dreams as thresholds. To face them consciously, to dream lucidly within them, was to meet one's shadow. But to remain passive, to wake in terror night after night, was to surrender to the trap. He compared it to ancient myths, Sisyphus pushing his boulder, Prometheus chained to his punishment. The human who denies awareness is condemned to repeat it. In mythic language, The repeating dream is the whisper of Hades, calling the living back to the underworld. In psychological terms, it is the moment the unconscious tries to balance what the conscious ego has denied. But the ego, terrified of dissolution, refuses to. It wakes abruptly, sweating, saying, "It was just a dream." And so the cycle continues. Jung warned that the repetition of a dream is a mirror of the repetition of. If the same emotional patterns haunt you, if the same relationships, failures, and fears repeat, it is because the dream has already taken root in waking reality. The psyche speaks in repetition until the message is embodied. The danger is that most people die before they ever understand what their dreams were trying to say. The trap is subtle. It does not kill you. It numbs you. You wake thinking you are awake, but you are still in the dream, living it, replaying it, carrying it into every choice you make. The soul becomes like a record stuck on a single note, echoing across decades until the melody of life itself becomes monotonous. Jung once said, "There is no difference between the dream and the life that refuses to awaken." The repeating dream, then, is not something that happens. It is something we become. He called it the soul's cry for consciousness. Each repetition is a knock at the door of awareness. Ignore it, and the knocking grows louder. Deny it, and it becomes thunder. The dream will chase you through every night until you stop running and ask, "What do you want?" Perhaps that is the real terror, not the monster in the dream, but the truth it carries. Because when you finally listen, you turn and face it, the dream may dissolve, and with it, the self you thought you were. And that, Jung warned, is the beginning of liberation, but also the most dangerous step of all. Jung believed that dreams speak in a language older than words, a grammar of images, emotions, and archetypes. It is the forgotten mother tongue of the psyche, the language of the gods before the invention of logic. When we dream, he said, we return to the realm where consciousness was born. There the soul speaks not through sentences, but through symbols, a burning house, a faceless child, a door that will not open, a shadow watching the room. Every recurring dream is written in this sacred code, and the tragedy of modern humanity is that we have forgotten how to read it. He warned that when a person dismisses their dreams as meaningless, they sever contact with the deepest layer of themselves. He who loses the way to him. Recurring dreams were not random neurological flickers. They were letters sent from the unconscious, repeating because the message had been ignored. Each symbol, each image, is a word from that inner language, and the repeating dream is the soul shouting the same word again and again, begging to be heard. He compared it to ritual. In old tribes, the shaman would fall into trance, entering the dream realm to retrieve meaning for the tribe. Each symbol was sacred. A snake could mean death or renewal. A storm could mean the god's anger or cleansing. Modern man, Jung lamented, has lost that reverence. We dream of falling and wake in fear, never realizing that falling is the psyche's metaphor for surrender. We dream of being chased and call it anxiety, never realizing that what chases is often our own forgotten. One of Jung's most studied patients was a woman who dreamt of drowning in black water. Night after night, would wake gasping, convinced she was dying. When Jung asked her what she felt in the water, she said, "Nothing, only silence." He asked her to draw it. She sketched a small figure beneath waves that looked almost like glass. Above the surface, she drew a single candle. It's the part of me that survived. Jung told her the candle was her conscious. The recurring dream, he explained, was not about death, descent. Her soul was calling her to explore the depth, not escape it. Months later, when she stopped resisting, the dreams ceased. Jung's interpretation was radical for his time. While Freud saw dreams as wish fulfillment, Jung saw them as communication from the self, the totality of the psyche that seeks balance between its parts. When a dream repeats, it means that balance is impossible, because the ego is deaf to the self's voice. The dream must therefore grow louder, more vivid, more terrifying, until it breaks through the wall of rational denial. Modern neuroscience now supports this symbolic function. Studies from the University of Geneva show that during REM sleep, the brain's limbic system, the seat of emotion and memory, becomes hyperactive, while the logical prefrontal cortex quiet. The result is a mind that speaks purely in images and feelings. Dreams, especially recurring ones, are emotional codes replayed until they are resolved. The neural loop mirrors the psychic. The ancient and the modern converge. Both science and Jung agree that repetition is the brain's and the soul's way of insisting on unfinished work. But Jung pushed the concept further. He believed that some symbols in recurring dreams were not personal at all. They were archetypal, shared by all humanity. The snake, the labyrinth, the mirror, the storm, these appear across cultures because they rise from the collective unconscious, the vast field of ancestral memory that connects all minds. When we dream of falling endlessly, we join countless others across history who dreamed the same fall. The dream does not belong to us alone. It belongs to the species. The repeating dream, then, becomes a ritual we unconsciously share with every human who has ever struggled to awaken. He wrote, "A dream is not an isolated event of the night. It is a message from the depths of time." Each symbol carries layers of history. The serpent that frightened a modern woman in her recurring nightmare once crawled through the myths of Egypt and Mesopotamia, once whispered to Eve in the garden. The storm that shakes a soldier in his sleep once tore through the mind of Odysseus. Our dreams are not new. They are replays of humanity's oldest conversations with its own fear. And yet, Jung observed something chilling. When a person refuses to translate their dreams, the symbols begin to degrade. The images lose meaning, turning grotesque, repetitive, violent. The psyche, frustrated, starts to force understanding. The dream becomes nightmare, not because the soul wishes harm, but because it must awaken consciousness by any means. The dream will use terror, Jung wrote, when the whisper of truth is. In religious texts, this idea reappears. The Egyptians believed that unexamined dreams were curses, messages from the dead denied entry into the living world. The Greeks built temples of Asclepius where people slept to receive healing dreams, guided by priests who interpreted their symbols. Even in Christianity, Joseph's ability to read Pharaoh's dreams determined the survival of a nation. Humanity once feared and revered this nightly theater. Now we medicate it, silence it, laugh at it. But Jung saw in the repeating dream a sacred persistence. The soul does not give up. It will speak again and again through images that shift, but meaning that endures until the message is understood. For some, that takes a lifetime. For others, it's a crisis, a breakdown, a loss, a collapse that finally opens the gates of perception. Only then do they see what the dream has been saying all along. He described this revelation as the cracking of the inner code. When a person learns to read their own dreams, they cease to be haunted. The repetition ends because the message has been received. The soul, satisfied, moves on to deeper work. But until that moment, the dream will not stop. To understand the dream is to translate the language of the unconscious into awareness. To ignore it is to remain its captive. Jung believed that every symbol hides both a key and a warning. The key opens the path to integration. The warning says, if you refuse to use it, the door will from the inside. The language of the dreaming soul, it speaks in paradox and metaphor, not comfort, but it is the only language that tells the truth. And when you learn to listen, to truly listen, you may realize your nightmares were never your end. They were your guides, knocking at the walls of you, waiting for you. And that is the secret Jung whispered to those who could bear to hear it. The dream is not trying to frighten you. It is trying to free you. Jung once said that the most terrifying discovery a human being can make is realizing that they are both the architect and the prisoner of their own mind. The recurring dream is proof of this paradox. It is a world built by the psyche itself, a self-contained realm where meaning and memory merge into a single, repeating script. Each time the dreamer closes their eyes, they return to the same stage set, the same unchanging sequence. What they do not realize is that the dream persists not because it is haunting them, but because they are sustaining it. For Jung, this phenomenon represented one of the most dangerous psychological conditions, identification with the dream image. When consciousness refuses to interpret, it begins to inhabit. The dreamer starts to live inside the symbol rather than learn from it. The unconscious then gains autonomy, creating a reality that rivals waking life. The person begins to speak of their dreams as if they were places. I was there again. He followed me again. And something in their eyes betrays confusion about which world they belong to. Jung wrote, "When a dream repeats, it means the dreamer is no longer dreaming it. The dream is dreaming him." He treated a patient named Emile, a writer who dreamt of wandering an endless library. The corridors were infinite, filled with books whose titles changed whenever he looked at them. Every night he searched for one particular volume, a book that, he said, contained the reason for his existence, but he could never reach it. When Jung asked what he felt upon waking, Emile replied, "I don't wake, I only change rooms," was true. Over time, he stopped writing, stopped eating, and began speaking in riddles. He would arrive at Jung's office muttering phrases like, "I've misplaced the book again." Jung realized that the dream had absorbed him completely. The man was no longer an author. He was a character written by his own unconscious. This merging of dream and identity is what Jung called psychic possession. The conscious ego loses its autonomy and becomes dominated by an archetypal force. In Emile's case, it was the seeker archetype, the eternal wanderer chasing knowledge without ever finding it. The recurring dream of the library was not tormenting him. It was feeding on his refusal to awaken. The more he seeks, Jung noted, the less he finds, because the library is infinite, and the infinite cannot love him. The dream had become a metaphor for an inner but because Emile mistook it for external reality, he could never escape. This, Jung warned, is the danger of every recurring dream. It tempts the ego to surrender to fast. The mind begins to romanticize the nightmare, to identify with its tragedy. The dreamer says, "It's always this way for me." And in that statement, the trap closes. What was once a symbolic message becomes destiny. The psyche, desperate for wholeness, builds a self-perpetuating story. And the dreamer, addicted to repetition, becomes both victim and storyteller. Modern psychology and neuroscience reveal how this trap functions biologically. During REM sleep, neural networks replay emotional memories in order to but if trauma remains unresolved, those same circuits refire night after night, reinforcing the emotional memory instead of releasing it. The dream becomes a feedback loop, a literal architecture of thought. The amygdala floods the system with fear, the hippocampus fails to file the memory, and the brain rebuilds the nightmare once more. The unconscious mechanism that was meant to heal becomes a machine of suffering. Jung interpreted this not as malfunction, but as meaning. He believed the soul uses repetition as an act of mercy, a way to insist that the wound be seen. The dreamer, however, experiences it as punishment. They dread sleep, yet the more they resist, the stronger the dream's pull becomes. The unconscious, like a tide, drags them back into the symbolic scene until confrontation is inevitable. The dream will not stop until the dreamer faces what the image represents. The door that never opens demands to be opened. The pursuer demands to be recognized. The fall demands to be surrendered. There is a moment in every repeating dream when the dreamer almost understands, a flicker of lucidity, a brief pause before the familiar resumes. Jung called this the threshold of awakening. If the dreamer can hold awareness in that instant, if they can ask the dream what it wants rather than run from it, the cycle can break. But few reach this point. Fear wakes them before comprehension can form, and so the story resets. He saw in this phenomenon a reflection of waking life. People who live the same emotional patterns, falling for the same kind of lover, repeating the same failures, are caught in waking dreams. Their behavior loops because the lesson remains unlearned. Jung wrote, "The dream repeats until the soul is ready to live differently." What appears to be fate is often merely unconscious repetition. There's a tale from Tibetan mysticism that Jung admired. It tells of a monk who dreamed each night of a serpent coiled around his neck. Terrified, he prayed for deliverance. Years passed, and still the serpent came. One night, exhausted, he stopped praying and asked the serpent why it would not leave him. The serpent replied, "Because I am your breath." At that moment the monk awoke, not from sleep, but from illusion. The serpent had never been his enemy, was his life force waiting to be accepted. The next night, the dream was gone. Jung saw this as the essence of liberation. The recurring dream is not trying to imprison, it is trying to integrate. It repeats because the ego clings to separation, to ignorance of the shadow. The moment the dreamer realizes the pursuer, the serpent, the maze are all parts of themselves, the architecture collapses. The dream dissolves because its purpose is complete. But not everyone escapes. Some grow addicted to their own nightmare. Jung warned that those who secretly love their suffering will never awake. The soul cannot free one who worships his chains. The recurring dream, in such cases, becomes identity. The person says, "This is who I am," and the unconscious obediently agrees. The dream no longer needs to chase them. They have become, and so the soul waits, patient as eternity. It will send new symbols, new mirrors, new corridor, until finally, one night, the dreamer stops running, turns, and sees. Then the walls crumble, the lake stills, the coffin opens, and the dreamer wakes, not into morning. Jung's warning echoes through his notebooks like a prophecy. Beware the dream that never changes, for it means you have refused to. Jung described the unconscious as a cathedral built without architect, a vast structure whose corridors rearrange themselves according to what the soul refused. Every recurring dream is a room inside this cathedral, constructed not by chance but by need. The walls are memories, the doors are choices not made, and the shadows are feelings that never found expression. The trap is not built to punish, it is built to preserve the truth until we are ready to bear it. The architecture of these psychic prisons follows patterns. Jung called them mandalas of suffering, closed systems where energy circulates but never escapes. The dream repeats because the psyche is recycling its unintegrated fragments. Each symbol, each event, each terror is an element of a structure designed by the unconscious. It will continue to rebuild the same environment until consciousness can enter it without fear. In that sense, the recurring dream is not an accident. It is architecture animated by. He once wrote about a soldier who dreamed of a single hallway filled with locked doors. Behind one door, he heard his child cry. Behind another, the sound of boots. Every night he would run, trying keys. When Jung asked him what he felt, the man said, "Trapped in something I built my." The dream, Jung explained, was exactly of repression. Each locked door was a memory from the sealed shut by guilt. The hallway existed because the soul, unable to process the horror conscious, stored it symbolic. The mind built walls where it could not build peace. Modern neuroscience has found physical evidence of these walls. Traumatic memory is not stored like normal memory. It fragments. The amygdala records emotion, the hippocampus fails to contextualize, and the prefrontal cortex cannot integrate. The result is an internal maze, an emotional architecture of isolated rooms that trigger one another endlessly. The recurring dream, then, is the psyche's attempt to wander these rooms and restore order. It is the map of trauma turned into myth, but Jung went further. He saw these dream structures as archetypal. The same labyrinths appear across cultures and centuries. The ancient Greeks spoke of the labyrinth of Crete, where the Minotaur devoured those who entered. In Jungian terms, the Minotaur is the shadow, the repressed instinct demanding sacrifice. The dream repeats because the hero never confronts the beast. He wakes before the sword strikes. The soul, therefore, rebuilds the maze each night, forcing the confrontation to continue. Only by facing the Minotaur, by seeing in it the reflection of one's own brutality, can the dream end. In alchemy, which Jung studied obsessively, the same principle appears. The vas hermeticum, the sealed vessel, is a metaphor for the psyche. Within it, opposites must collide until transformation occurs. The recurring dream is that vessel made visible. The unconscious seals the dreamer inside their own psyche, forcing them to endure repetition until the internal conflict reaches synthesis. The trap, therefore, is the cure in disguise. Still, Jung warned that the mind can become addicted to its own architecture. The dreamer who refuses to interpret begins to worship the dream itself. They analyze endlessly, decorate the walls of the prison with theories, never realizing that understanding without transformation is another form of. The intellect, Jung wrote, is a fine lantern, but the soul demands fire. The recurring dream cannot be solved like a puzzle. It must be lived through. He often compared the psyche. The upper floors are conscious, tidy, and lit. The basement is the unconscious, damp and crowded with forgotten things. When we refuse to descend, the basement begins to rise. Strange noises at night, cold drafts through the floorboards, these are dreams calling us downward. If ignored, the house becomes haunted. Jung told his students, ghosts are memories that refuse to die, because no one will listen to them. The recurring dream is the haunting made intimate. It is your own ghost knocking at the door. One of his most striking metaphors was the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail. He saw it as the perfect image of the psychic trap. The dream feeds on itself, looping endlessly, consuming energy that should flow outward into life. Depression, anxiety, and creative paralysis are its waking manifestation. The energy of transformation, trapped in the dream, corrodes the soul. Jung warned that a civilization ignoring its dreams becomes an Ouroboros too, a collective endlessly consuming its own image. And yet, within this architecture, there is always a hidden exit. Jung discovered that these dream structures are never completely closed. Somewhere, often unnoticed, lies a door that does not belong to the pattern, a symbol of potential awakening. It might be a window of light, a stairway, a single voice calling the dreamer by name. But the exit cannot be forced. It appears only when the dreamer stops fighting the structure and begins to understand its purpose. The maze dissolves not through escape, but through comprehension. He told the story of a woman plagued by a dream of being buried alive. Each night, she clawed at the coffin lid until she woke screaming. Jung asked her to imagine what would happen. She stopped struggling. She looked horrified. "I would die." "Perhaps," Jung replied, "or perhaps wake up." The next night in her dream, she stopped. The lid dissolved into light. She never had the dream again. The architecture of the trap is precise because the unconscious is mercifully intelligent. It repeats not to torture, but to perfect. The corridors exist to lead you back to the room you've avoided. Every wall is a memory. Every echo is an emotion. Every shadow is a version of yourself, waiting to be recognized. The trap's purpose is not imprisonment. It's integrate. Jung believed that understanding this architecture was the beginning of liberation. To see the pattern is to weaken its power. What we name, we bring into consciousness, and what is conscious cannot chain us. Art, the dream may continue, but it will no longer frighten. The corridor remains, but you know now who built it and why. In that knowledge, the dreamer becomes the architect. And once the dreamer remembers they are the builder, the walls begin to move. The trap reshapes itself into a temple, and the nightmare becomes revelation. Jung once wrote, "The dead live in us as much as we live in them." He did not mean this metaphorically. To him, the unconscious was not only personal but collective, a vast ocean where individual minds are mere waves upon the surface. Beneath those waves, the dreams of our ancestors still move, shaping our fears, our desires, our memories. The recurring dream is sometimes not ours. It is an inheritance, an unfinished story passed down through generations, repeating until one soul finally dares to. He saw this in his patients again and again. Dreams that contained symbols the dreamer could not have known, languages they had never learned, faces from centuries past. He called them ancestral residues, fragments of experience that survived the death of those who lived them. Jung believed that the psyche, like the body, carries genetic memory, a psychic DNA composed of images, instincts, and forgotten traumas. The recurring dream may therefore be the mind's attempt to process what the family line has refused. One case, which Jung never published in full, concerned a young woman who dreamed every night of a stone well. She would peer into it and see a reflection that was not her own, a woman with her same eyes but dressed in 18th century clothing. When she described this to Jung, he asked about her family history. Her grandmother, she said, had drowned herself in a well after losing a child. Jung understood immediately. The dream was not about drowning. It was about the soul calling for acknowledgement. The ungrieved death had become an echo, looping through the bloodline, searching for consciousness. When the ancestors are forgotten, he told her, they dream through us. Modern research into epigenetic trauma now lends eerie credibility to this theory. Scientists at Emory University found that mice trained to fear the scent of cherry blossoms that fear to their offspring through changes in gene expression. The descendants who had never encountered the odor still panicked when they smelled it. Trauma leaves chemical marks that endure. In human terms, this means that our nightmares might carry memories not of our own lives, but of lives. The child who dreams of drowning in a fire may be reliving a grief that belongs to the lineage. Jung's genius was to bridge science and myth. He said the ancestors do not haunt us as ghosts. They haunt us as patterns. Family histories of addiction, abuse, abandonment. These are the waking versions of recurring dreams. The same roles replay through generations: the savior, the betrayer, the victim, the silent one. The unconscious remembers everything, and until the pattern is made conscious, it repeats. The task, Jung said, is to complete what was left unfinished by those who came before. He often saw this as the hidden reason behind repeating dreams of places that never existed. Patients described ancient houses, forgotten villages, deserts filled with ruins. Jung believed these were psychic landscapes built from ancestral memory. The house represents the lineage itself. Each room is an era, each object a secret. When the dream repeats, it means that has not yet been explored. Somewhere in those halls, an ancestor waits to be remembered. He connected this idea to the archetype. Myths from every culture tell of families doomed to repeat suffering. Oedipus blinded by fate, the house of Atreus devoured by vengeance, the biblical sins of the father. Jung saw these not as supernatural punishments, but as psychological inheritance. The recurring dream is the curse transformed into message. It is the soul's way of saying, "You have been chosen to end this." He told a story of a man who dreamed for decades of walking across a frozen lake. The ice all was cracked, but never broke. Jung asked what he knew of his family's history. The man replied that his grandfather had drowned while trying to save another from icy water. Jung suggested that the dream was not about fear, but atonement. The soul was reenacting the unfinished gesture, crossing the frozen surface night after night in an attempt to redeem the failure of the past. When the man performed a ritual at the lake, lighting a candle and speaking his ancestor's name aloud, the dream stopped. The unconscious, Jung said, does not seek revenge, it seeks recognition. Ancient cultures understood this. In many indigenous traditions, dreams are conversations with ancestors. The Yoruba call them alaworan, messages of lineage. In Japanese Shinto belief, the dead become kami, divine presences guiding the living through dreams. Even in Christianity, Joseph is warned in a dream to flee to Egypt, a reminder that the dream world is not bound by time. Jung saw all of this as evidence of the collective unconscious communicating across centuries. The dream is the bridge between worlds. Yet he also issued a warning. To awaken ancestral dreams is to awaken ancestral pain. Those who inherit the task of remembrance carry double weight, their own consciousness and that of the forgotten. To become conscious, he wrote, is to take upon oneself the burden of the past. The recurring dream, in this sense, is not a torment, but an initiation. The dreamer becomes the vessel through which the lineage heals. Modern therapy confirms this principle in practice. Family constellation work, trauma mapping, and generational analysis reveal that when one person breaks a destructive pattern, forgiving, confronting, or simply understanding, it affects those who come after. Jung anticipated this decades earlier, writing, "The individual who faces the ancestral shadow redeems his entire bloodline." The dream stops not just for the dreamer, but for all who share the same psychic thread. But the path is not gentle. Those who carry ancestral dreams often describe exhaustion, as though they are living multiple lives at once. Jung understood the psyche of the living bears the weight of the unfinished. The only way to lighten it is through awareness. By naming what was unspoken, by grieving what was denied, the dreamer breaks the loop. The well no longer calls because the ancestor has been heard. The architecture of the trap then extends beyond one lifetime. It is built by centuries of silence, yet every generation is given a key, the chance to listen, to translate, to end the repetition. Jung believed this was the true meaning of redemption, not escape from sin, but illumination of shadow across time. He wrote, "We are not only shaped by our ancestors, we must in turn shape them. For what they began in darkness, we must complete in light." And perhaps that is what every repeating dream asks, to remember what was forgotten, to finish what was left undone, to free not only ourselves, but the entire chain of souls dreaming through our blood. Jung used to say that the psyche is older than the brain that carries it. What he meant was that the machinery of dreaming did not begin with biology. It began with consciousness itself. Long before there were words for memory or emotion, life learned to remember through repetition. The instinct that taught the first creature to flee from pain is the same instinct that makes the modern mind replay it in dreams. To Jung, this was not coincidence, it was the continuity of soul. What modern science calls neural reconsolidation, he called the psyche's attempt at salvation. The scientific story begins in the thalamus, that small, ancient core of the brain that filters sensory information. During sleep, it turns inward, replaying signals from the past day. The hippocampus, which forms memories, begins to file them, while the amygdala, the seat of fear, fires as if the danger were happening again. To the dreamer, this cascade of electrical storms becomes narrative, a chase, a fall, a loss. The body rehearses terror to diminish it. Yet in those who carry unresolved trauma, the brain cannot complete the process. The memory never reaches storage. It loops endless. Thus, the recurring dream is born, a physiological echo. But Jung saw something more profound in this. He believed that behind the neurochemical dance lies an organizing intelligence, the self, which uses the dream to guide healing. The brain may repeat because of chemistry, but the meaning of what it repeats arises from archetype. The soul, he said, uses biology as its grammar. Each electrical impulse, each synaptic replay is the language through which the psyche continues its ancient conversation with itself. Neuroscientists have begun to stumble upon this. At Harvard Medical School, studies on REM sleep reveal that dreams are not random, but patterned around unresolved emotional experiences. When subjects report recurring nightmares, brain imaging shows consistent activation in the anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for conflict monitoring and moral evaluation. The dream is literally the brain's attempt to reconcile inner contradiction. Jung predicted this a century earlier when he wrote, "The psyche creates images to balance." Science has finally. The dream is self-regulation, disguised as story. He believed that this mechanism is not just as DNA evolves through mutation and correction, consciousness evolves through repetition and integration. The collective unconscious, the shared memory of humanity, replays its traumas through myth, art, and dream. Civilizations repeat wars and collapses the way the individual repeats nightmare. The pattern is the same: unconscious error, seeking awareness. The dream of the species, Jung said, is history itself. Modern physics offers eerie parallels. Quantum theorists describe reality as information looping upon itself, the universe as a feedback system, learning to know its own state. Jung would have smiled. He often spoke of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reveal the unity of psyche and matter. Perhaps he would say, the recurring dream is the microcosmic version of that universal loop, a soul-sized recursion within the greater pattern of reality, repeating to know itself. To the neuroscientist, the loop is electrical. To Jung, it is spiritual. Both describe the same phenomenon from different altitudes. The brain replays what the soul has not resolved. The soul creates the dream. The brain renders it in light and sound. When the mind awakens within this loop, when awareness enters, it interrupts the automatic cycle. The neurons still fire, but now the meaning changes. What was once a prison becomes a revelation. One of Jung's patients, a physicist himself, dreamed every night of standing in a vast dome filled with machinery. At the center was a glowing orb pulsing with blue light. Each time he approached it, alarms blared, and he woke. When Jung asked what he thought the orb represented, the man said, "It's the formula I can't solve." Jung replied, "Or perhaps it is solving you." In later sessions, the physicist began to weep when describing the dream. The orb, he realized, was his heart, his capacity for emotion buried beneath intellect. When he accepted that, the dream ended. The machine was not his enemy. It was his anatomy of avoidance, rebuilt night after night until he saw the truth. In this way, the science of dreams is inseparable from the philosophy of consciousness. The dream repeats because both neuron and archetype demand closure. Trauma and truth share the same circuitry. Until feeling and insight align, the brain cannot complete its task, and the soul cannot evolve. The dream is the meeting ground where matter and meaning negotiate peace. Researchers at MIT studying lucid dreaming found that when dreamers become aware inside their recurring dreams, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic, re-engages, creating a feedback loop between rational thought and subconscious imagery. Jung would have called this individuation in motion, the conscious ego entering dialogue with the unconscious. The recurring dream, once suffered passively, becomes active exploration. Awareness turns the trap into a tool. The mind becomes its own therapist, its own priest, its own scientist. But Jung issued a caution that science cannot quantify the danger of premature awakening. If the dreamer confronts truth too soon without the psychological strength to integrate it, the result can be psychic fragmentation. The dream may then mutate into new forms, darker and more complex. The unconscious protects its treasures with layers of repetition, revealing only what the ego can bear. Jung compared this to radiation. Consciousness is purified by exposure to truth, but too much at once burns the soul. Still, he believed that understanding the biological function of dreams did not diminish their mystery. It deepened it. The brain is not a machine indifferent. It is an organ of revelation, sculpted by evolution to translate spirit into pattern. Each recurring dream is evidence that consciousness is not static. It learns through rhythm, through recurrence, through return. Repetition, Jung wrote, is the heartbeat of becoming. So the science and the soul converge in one image, a circle. The neuron fires, returns, the psyche replays its story until comprehension completes the circuit. At that moment, awareness flows freely through the system. The brain rests, the soul exhales. The dream may visit again, but now it comes as memory, not as prison. And Jung's final observation on this union between matter and mystery remains prophetic. When science discovers the soul, it will not be by microscope or telescope, but by the recognition that the universe dreams through us. The dream repeats not because it is broken, but because it is teaching. It replays not to torment, but to evolve. There is a moment when a dream stops being a message and becomes a mirror. What once came to guide now begins to feed. Jung called this the threshold of psychic captivity, the point at which the dreamer no longer visits the dream, but lives inside. When this happens, the soul is no longer learning. It is circling, devoured by its own reflection. The unconscious, ignored for too long, turns its language into a haunting. The first sign, Jung said, is emotional déjà vu, a feeling that does not belong to the present moment. An inexplicable sadness when entering a familiar place, a surge of fear when hearing a certain tone, a smile that feels rehearsed. These are fragments of the recurring dream spilling into waking life. The barrier between worlds thins. You begin to sense that you have already walked through this day, already spoken these words, already stood in this. The dream has leaked into time itself. Then comes the echo of symbols. You start to know them everywhere. The staircase, a dream appearing in a stranger's house, the same bird crossing your path, the same clock stopping. Jung did not dismiss this coincidence. He called it synchronicity, the moment when the outer world aligns with the inner one. The dream has extended its architecture into reality, forcing consciousness to notice. The psyche, unable to deliver the message in sleep, begins to carve it into daylight. The third sign is distortion of memory. The dreamer confuses what happened in waking life with what happened in dreams. You recall conversations that never occurred, accuse others of words they never said, feel betrayal that belongs to another realm. The unconscious begins to rewrite history to match its narrative. Jung described this as dream in when the symbolic truth overwhelms the factual. The soul prefers meaning to accurate, and so it reshapes the past to complete its pattern. He once treated a woman who dreamt repeatedly of losing her child in a forest. Over time, she began to believe the event had truly happened. She would call the police, searching for a child who never existed. The dream had merged with her identity. Jung did not treat her as delusional. He treated her as possessed. The archetype, he wrote, when denied, seizes the personality as its vessel. The mother archetype, repressed and wounded, had taken full control. Her psyche replayed its unfinished story until her waking self became its actor. The next sign is the erosion of waking desire. Jung noticed that those trapped in repeating dreams begin to lose interest in the living world. The dream drains their vitality, feeding on their energy like a parasite. They sleep more, withdraw from others, and speak as if their life is elsewhere. He saw this as a form of psychic vampirism, the unconscious consuming the energy meant for creation. The dream, he warned, and blood for its symbols. It will take attention, emotion, life force, until the dreamer reclaims authorship. Modern psychology would call this dissociation. The neural patterns of REM begin to activate even in waking states, blurring the boundaries between sleep and reality. But Jung saw the metaphysical meaning behind the phenomenon. The soul is trying to complete its work, while the conscious mind refuses to participate. The dream must therefore intrude upon the day. What science calls a malfunction, Jung called desperate. There are subtler signs, too, the flattening of emotion. The dreamer laughs, but the laughter feels distant, as if played from another room. Joy becomes mimicry. The smile returns, but hollow, automated. It is the same smile worn inside the conceals. Jung said that this was the most dangerous stage because the individual appears normal. They function, work, even love, but their eyes reveal vacancy. They are, as he wrote, alive only as echo. In some, the trap deepens into repetition, the same arguments, the same lovers, the same mistakes. They swear they've learned, but the pattern reforms. Jung explained that the psyche externalizes the dream to force awareness. The soul says, if you will not wake inside the dream, I will make your life the dream instead. Thus, the same symbolic content migrates from night to day. The partner who abandons you is the same one you chased in the dream. The job that suffocates you is the same endless corridor. The world becomes an extension of the unconscious, and the dreamer, unknowing, walks in circles. The final sign is the most terrifying, fear of awakening. The dreamer begins to dread lucidity. They resist therapy, avoid introspection, cling to routine. They defend their suffering as if it were an heirloom. Jung said, when the soul fears awakening, it has married the shadow. The dreamer now identified the trap. They prefer repetition to revelation, because revelation requires death, the death of the false self. He compared this to a mythic curse. Like Narcissus staring into the water, enamored of his reflection, the dreamer cannot look away. The image is beautiful, even in its torment. Jung warned that entire civilizations fall into this condition, dreaming of progress while repeating destruction, worshipping light while manufacturing darkness. The collective psyche, too, can be possessed by its own dream. And yet the signs of the trap also contain their cure. Each symptom is an invitation to consciousness. The déjà vu asks you to pause and see. The symbols call you to interpret. The fatigue demands rest. The fear of awakening exposes the doorway. The dream's cruelty is precision. It attacks exactly where awareness grows. Jung wrote that the psyche is never the enemy, only ignorance makes it so. He told his students, the soul will haunt you until you love it. The repeating dream, the mirrored signs, the hollow smile, they are all the soul's strategies to be seen. When the dreamer finally turns toward them instead of away, the haunting ends. Awareness dissolves possession. The trap collapses under the weight of its own revelation. But few recognize the signs in time. Most call them coincidence, stress, imagination, and so the dream continues. The same corridors, the same chases, the same smile, the same shadow waiting at the end. Jung left a warning in his journals that reads, less like analysis and more like prophecy. When the dreamer forgets he is dreaming, the dream begins to dream the world, and that is how souls become trapped, not in sleep, but in life itself. There comes a night when running is. The dream returns as always, the same corridors, the same echoes, but this time something inside you stops. The air feels different, heavier, almost sacred. Jung called this moment the descent, the initiation. Every soul must endure, once denial can no longer protect it. It is the point where the dreamer, exhausted by repetition, turns to face what has been pursuing them. The nightmare does not vanish, it opens. To Jung, this confrontation was the true purpose of recurring dreams. The trap exists only to force the descent, because healing can happen only within the darkness we've refused to enter. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The labyrinth of dreams is the geography of that darkness, the blueprint of the soul's unfinished work. Every passage is a memory, every turn a choice avoided, every dead end a denial. He described the process as an inner alchemy. The dreamer must descend into their own underworld, just as Orpheus descended to retrieve Eurydice, or Inanna went below. These myths, Jung said, are not stories, but instruction. The underworld is not a place beneath the earth. It is beneath awareness. The recurring dream is the entrance. To go down is to fall inward. At first, the descent feels like madness. The dream intensifies. The symbols mutate. The corridors twist in new directions. The faces in the dark start to speak. Jung explained this as the unconscious responding to engagement. The moment the ego enters dialogue, the symbols come alive. The dream is no longer content to terrify. Now it begins to teach. What once chased you now speaks in riddles. You realize it was never a monster at all. It was a part of you, wearing the only costume you would not ignore. He recounted a patient named Lotta, who dreamed for years of a locked cellar beneath her childhood home. Every night she heard knocking from below, but was too afraid to open the door. Finally, under Jung's guidance, she entered the dream lucidly and descended the stairs. When she unlocked the cellar, she found a child sitting in the dark, whispering her name. The girl was covered in dust, but smiled when Lotta knelt beside her. "I've been waiting," the child said. Jung interpreted this as the recovery of the inner child, the innocent self abandoned in early trauma. The recurring dream had been the psyche's way of calling her back to wholeness. Once she embraced the child, the dream stopped. The descent often begins with fear but ends with recognition. Jung noted that every terrifying symbol, spider, snake, shadow, eventually transforms when faced. The snake becomes renewal, the spider becomes creativity, the shadow becomes ally. The demon you run from, he wrote, is the guardian of your next stage of growth. The labyrinth is not punishment, it is initiation. Modern science, observing trauma process, offers a striking parallel. Therapists speak of memory reconsolidation, the process of re-entering painful memories in a safe context to rewire their meaning. Jung described the same process decades earlier through myth. The dreamer who descends consciously re-experiences the terror within symbolic protection, allowing integration instead of re-traumatization. The brain updates its story, the soul rewrites its myth. Still, the descent demands everything. The dreamer must surrender control. Logic fails here. The symbols speak their own grammar. Jung called this active imagination, a dialogue with the unconscious through image and emotion. The dreamer listens, responds, interprets, and in doing so, participates in creation. The psyche, once divided, begins to merge. The dream is no longer something that happens to you. It becomes something you are co-authoring. But the labyrinth tests. Jung warned that many turn back to. The dream may offer false exit, doors of light that lead nowhere, friendly guides that distract. Illusions of awakening are merely ego's. True descent means continuing past comfort, past hope, until you reach the center, the place where your greatest fear and your greatest truth are the same. That is where the transformation begins. He compared this center to the nigredo of alchemy, the black sun, the dissolving phase where all form breaks down. Here, identity itself disintegrate. The dreamer may feel as though they are dying. In a sense, they are. The false self cannot follow into the depth. The smile, the persona, the rational mask, all dissolve. What remains is raw awareness, stripped of narrative. Jung said that to reach this state is to meet the self, the organizing principle of the psyche, the God within. He wrote, "The center of the labyrinth is not a place, but an event, the moment when consciousness and unconscious recognize each other. In that instant, the dreamer realizes that the labyrinth was never separate. The walls are their thoughts, the monsters their fears, the exit their acceptance. The dream collapses into understanding." In one of his journals, Jung described a dream of his own descent. He found himself in a cave filled with red light, a serpent coiled around a glowing stone. He felt both terror and awe. The serpent spoke, "You built this place to hide me. Now I will show you how to live with me." When he woke, he wrote only one line: "To reconcile with the serpent is to end the dream." For those who reach the center, the world itself begins to change. The nightmares cease, not because they are conquered, but because they are no longer needed. The psyche, once divided, no longer has to shout. The dreamer walks through waking life differently, slower, grounded, unshaken. The labyrinth remains, but it is transparent now. The soul has learned its. Jung believed that if humanity as a whole could undertake such a descent, history's cycles of violence and denial might finally, but he feared we would not. Most people, he said, prefer the comfort of repetition to the terror of revelation. And so we live in collective dreams, political, religious, cultural, replaying the same stories under new names. The labyrinth has become global, yet he left a map for those willing to descend. It is drawn not in words, but in courage. When the dream comes again, do not run. Ask it what it wants. Walk into the darkness, not to escape it, but to understand it. There, in the quiet center of the labyrinth, where everything you feared meets everything you are, you will hear the only voice that has ever mattered, your own soul, whispering that it was never your enemy. The descent is the end of the nightmare, but it is also the beginning of truth. When the dreamer finally stops running, when fear gives way to awareness, a strange reversal occurs. The dream ceases to control and begins to respond. The corridors, once hot, now shift like living things, yielding to intention. Shadows dissolve. The monsters that once hunted now watch silently as if awaiting instruction. Jung called this phenomenon the awakening dream, the moment consciousness enters the unconscious and illumination begins from within. This is not the same as ordinary lucidity. It is not the realization that one is dreaming. It is the realization is dreaming. It is the birth of understanding inside the chaos of image. Jung described it as the moment the eye of God opens the dream. The dreamer becomes both participant and observer, mortal and mythic, the one who dreams and the one who is dreamed. In that instant, the centuries of repetition, the ancestral echoes, the symbols of terror, all align into a single truth. The nightmare was never against you. It was you calling yourself home. He wrote, "The dream, when understood, becomes not message, but union. The psyche ceases its division between conscious and unconscious. The walls of the labyrinth evaporate because they were never solid. They were projections of unacknowledged fear. The awakening dream is the alchemical gold, the rubedo stage where opposites are reconciled. The soul, once fragmented, becomes whole, luminous, indivisible. Many of Jung's patients who reached this stage described dreams of light breaking through confined spaces, basements opening, dark waters turning clear, locked rooms flooding with sunrise. The imagery was universal, illumination after confinement. Jung saw this as the psyche's visual language for liberation. The dreamer has completed the descent and now rises, bringing with them the wisdom of shadow. He believed that this awakening had biological correlates as well. The nervous system, once trapped in loops of fear, begins to recalibrate. Modern neuroscience supports this. When trauma is integrated, REM patterns change, stress hormones normalize, and new neural connections form between the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. The body itself learns safety again. The The soul's liberation becomes the brain's healing. But Jung's insight went beyond therapy. He saw in the awakening dream the possibility of spiritual transformation. For him, this state was not simply psychological, it was numinous. When consciousness enters the dream, it touches eternity. The dreamer becomes aware that they are part of something vast, the self, the archetypal totality that transcends individual life. The nightmare's architecture dissolves into cosmic design. The dreamer recognizes themselves as both atom and universe, creator and creation. He told of a patient who dreamed for years of drowning in black water. One night the dream changed. The patient sank willingly, reaching the bottom where a faint light glowed. When he touched it, the water turned to air. He found himself standing on the ocean floor beneath a sky of stars. I was breathing without lungs. I was everything that had ever lived. Jung said softly, "You have met the self." The recurring dream had fulfilled its purpose, to unite the personal with the eternal. In the awakening dream, even pain becomes sacred. Every monster, every fall, every locked door reveals itself as a disguised guide. The chase was not to punish, but to prepare. The loss was not destruction, but space for renewal. Jung believed that when a person reaches this understanding, their entire perception of reality shifts. The outer world mirrors the inner one. What once appeared as cruelty now appears as necessity. The dreamer awakened walks through life as through a lucid dream, aware that everything is symbolic, that every encounter is revelation in disguise. But this liberation demands humility. Jung warned that enlightenment carries its own danger, the temptation to believe one has finished. The ego, sly and persistent, may claim ownership of the awakening. I have mastered my dreams, and thus the loop threatens to return, for possession can take the form of pride as easily as fear. True liberation, Jung insisted, is not victory but surrender, the willingness to remain awake, not above the dream, but within it, in continuous dialogue with, he wrote. To awaken in the dream is to accept that one will never wake from existence. The dream does not end, it transforms. Life becomes the ongoing dream of the universe observing it. The soul, once trapped in repetition, now flows freely between states, waking and sleeping, light and shadow, self and world. Consciousness becomes fluid, like water returning to its source. In this state, recurring dreams may still appear, but they no longer bring terror. They come as teachers, gentle now, whispering reminders. The same corridor that once imprisoned you might reappear in sleep, but this time you walk it calmly, aware that every door opens because you are no longer afraid to turn the handle. Jung described this as the smile of the self, not the hollow smile of denial, but the serene curve of understanding. The awakened dreamer carries that smile into waking life. It is quiet, unforced, radiant from within. It is the smile of one who has looked at their own abyss and found light staring back. Such people, Jung said, become centers of gravity in a chaotic world. Their presence stabilizes others. Their calm spreads like a contagion of clarity. He who has awakened in the dream, Jung wrote, becomes the dream of the world made conscious. And yet liberation is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of stewardship. The dreamer who awakens must live differently, carrying awareness into every gesture, every choice. They must remember that reality, too, is a kind of dream shaped by collective thought. To remain awake within it, the highest art. To forget is to fall asleep again. The awakening dream, then, is both culmination and invitation. It teaches that the nightmare was never punishment, only guidance, that fear was never the enemy, only the threshold, and that the soul, though trapped for lifetimes in repetition, was never truly lost. It was rehearsing its return. When awareness fills the dream completely, the dreamer no longer asks for escape. They simply breathe, and the walls of the labyrinth turn to light. The air vibrates with stillness. The monsters bow. The silence speaks. And somewhere in that impossible calm, the dreamer finally understands. The way out was never exit. It was awakening. Every revelation carries its echo. Even after liberation, even after the nightmare has turned, Jung warned that the most insidious traps still wait. The belief, the journey, is over. For in the moment one declares themselves awakened, the dream begins. The psyche, subtle beyond measure, can turn enlightenment into ego faster than fear ever could. Jung called this the second shadow, the darkness that grows behind the light. It begins innocently. The dreamer who has touched transcendence feels untouchable. The lessons once learned with humility now become banners of identity. They speak not as seekers, but as masters. They tell others how to awaken, forgetting that the process never ends. Jung wrote, "There is no final waking, only deeper layers of sleep disguised truth." The awakening becomes its own illusion, a beautiful cage of certainty. The smile returns, serene this time, but hollow in another way. The ego has rebuilt itself from the ashes of revelation, cloaked now in light instead of He saw this often among those who mistook spiritual experience for completion. They spoke of unity, love, cosmic peace, but their eyes betrayed detachment, not compassion. They had fled the human in pursuit of the divine, and thus betrayed both. Jung called this pneumatic inflation, the swelling of consciousness beyond its proper bounds. The self believes it has merged with the infinite, forgetting that the infinite includes imperfection. The newly awakened become evangelists of denial, preaching transcendence while avoiding the simple work of being human. He told of a man who dreamed he stood at a mountain, sunlight blazing through his body. He felt one with all existence, infinite and eternal. When Jung asked how he felt afterward, the man said, "I no longer fear anything, not even death." Alos. But within weeks his life unraveled. He left his family, quit his work, and declared himself a prophet of consciousness. His dreams grew violent, storms, floods, collapsing temples. The psyche, Jung explained, was correcting imbalance. He soared too high, Jung wrote, and the gods he sought pulled him down. This is the danger of mistaking the dream's awakening for its end. The unconscious does not stop speaking. Even enlightenment must be integrated, renewed, grounded in humility. No tree, Jung said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The awakened who refuse descent are condemned to float, weightless and hollow, in a self-made heaven that slowly turns to hell. Modern psychology confirms this archetypal rhythm. Neuroscience observes that the brain's patterns of insight and ego reconstruction mirror waves. The very circuits that dissolve during mystical experiences rebuild themselves afterward. The self reforms because it must. Identity is the vessel through which consciousness acts in the world. To imagine permanent dissolution is fantasy. Awakening, then, is not erasure, but relationship, a continuous dialogue between self and self, light and shadow, finite and infinite. When one side dominates, the psyche compensates, the balance be kept. Jung likened this to the alchemical. After rubedo, the stage of enlightenment, comes coagulatio, the solidification of experience back into life. The gold must be poured into form. The philosopher who tries to remain in illumination without returning to matter ends in madness. The saint who denies his humanity becomes tyrant to his own ideals. One must return, Jung wrote, to the market square with mud still on the feet. Only then can the light serve life instead of consuming it. He feared that modern spirituality would fall into this trap, a culture obsessed with transcendence, terrified of shadow. He predicted the rise of what he called psychic inflation on a mass scale, where entire societies mistake distraction for awakening, performance for peace. When the many proclaim themselves conscious, they will dream more deeply than ever, and so the dream continues, glittering, wrapped in mantras and affirmation, while the soul quietly withers beneath. But Jung did not end with despair. He offered a way to stay awake within the illusion. The key, he said, is awareness of cycles. The dreamer must understand that every insight, every transformation will eventually darken again. The light casts shadow, its very existence. Awareness must renew itself daily, moment by moment. The task is not to remain enlightened, but to remain honest, to notice when the smile becomes masked, to sense when humility hardens into superiority, to feel when peace becomes apathy. These are the subtle shifts by which awakening decays into sleep. He wrote, "The self is not a state, but a movement. It dies each time we cling. True consciousness, therefore, is not stillness, but participation. It dances between knowing and unknowing, holding neither too tightly. The awakened dreamer must learn to dream again, this time consciously compassionate, aware that the dream is sacred precisely because it never ends. In his final writings, Jung described a vision. He stood in a circle of mirrors, infinite reflections stretching in every direction. Each reflection smiled back, but some smiles were kind and others false. He felt both awe and dread. A voice, his own yet not his own, whispered, "This is eternity, awakening within awakening, dream within dream. The danger is not in sleep, but in forgetting that you are dreaming." He woke with tears in his eyes and wrote his last warning to those who would follow. Do not seek to end the dream. Seek only to know when you are dreaming. That is the essence of Jung's final message. Awakening is not the destination. It is a practice. Each moment of awareness is a birth. Each lapse into illusion a death. Both are holy. The soul does not seek escape from the cycle. It seeks participation in it. The labyrinth never disappears, but the awakened learn to walk it with open eyes. And so the final image remains. A dreamer standing at dawn between worlds, smiling, not the empty smile of denial, not the serene mask of enlightenment, but the quiet smile of understanding. The dream still unfolds around them, endless, yet now they know there is no trap, no prison, no awakening that lasts forever. Only the eternal rhythm of the soul, learning itself, repetition, falling asleep only to awaken once. Because, as Jung whispered into the fading pages of his red book, the dream is God's way of remembering himself through us.